father or whoever, right? You know what I mean? And there was a delineation between the husband's slaves and the woman's slaves, right? The white slaves. And it would be a contention inside of a family on, you know, what the husband could do. It would actually be part of, part of their marriage contract would state, like this, the husband has no right over over the slaves that is being inherited through the wife, through the family that she got through her family, right? And so much so, there was instances of female slave owners, protesting against their husbands on how they could discipline, and vice versa as well. It was in other instances or what have you, but not because they were benevolent or owners or anything. It was all because they had a wealth condition. It was all wealth and economics incentive. Once that incentive was taken away, then you notice, like for instance, they weren't lynching in slavery. They were lynching post-slavery. All the crimes that they were doing to black bodies that happened in the masses were happening after slavery because we were somebody's property before. You couldn't just, in fact, another passage in the book talked about how many times slave owners would rent their slaves out to somebody to get income. And so there was this incident where a white female inn owner, right, had rented a female slave from another female slave owner, shall I say. And she was abusing her. And it came, it was known by the slave owner. She just took her slave back. You know what I mean? So before then, there wasn't just an outright, any white person could do anything to a black person. You had this, they were property. You know what I mean? So from that perspective, not to say that, we have it better today than, or any generation had it better than those who were going through it. But just that notion of that it wasn't full, I could just do anything to this black person for any particular reason, because no, you were going to have to be handled. There was going to have to be some sort of conclusion, some sort of consequence, whether you had to pay that slave owner or whatever. It wasn't full black, whereas after slavery, any white person could do anything to any black person at any given time. There was no value no more in our bodies. You know what I mean? And so that's where that perspective of where that was coming from. Just another perspective, not to say anyone's was wrong or right. Okay, going to the next question.
1,000 people per person, right? That they have to take care of, and that's problematic because they can't deal with all of these people, right? And I think that if you have this type of system in place where they're specifically geared towards working with reparations, then it can be useful. However, I will add that I don't think giving money as a form of reparations will actually be helpful, right? Because you need something that's sustainable. You need something such as education that'll be a form of reparations, right? Money can only go so far. And we've all heard of someone who's been awarded a lump sum of money, whether it's in a lawsuit or somebody winning a lottery, and within a year they're broke because that doesn't lead to wealth, right? So a system like free education or that type of system is what would be useful in terms of reparations.
Thanks, Juan. Does any other panelists would like to speak to that, or to Juan's questions, or the question directly? To Juan's statement or the question directly, which is, if and when reparations is awarded to descendants of the slave, do you believe an entity like the Freedmen's Bank and Bureau be created to help implement those reparation programs and policies? So that's the original question, and you have Juan's statement.
Sorry about that, you guys. So just to piggyback what he said, I think when we talk about reparations, when we talk about reparations, I think reparations is a little bit more complex than just cash payments. We need to understand that is an element, because you do need to have liquid cash that needs to be injected into the black community in order to actually take on the wealth position that we want and that we are owed. There also is education as a component. There also is funding a lot of our educational systems, our HBCUs and other elements like that. So I don't want anyone to walk away thinking, if you haven't been formally immersed in what reparations would or could look like, that it's only about cash. I mean, everyone uses that as a quick scapegoat just to say, well, we can't do that because I know my uncle who done that and he bought a Cadillac and 30 gallons of Kool-Aid and that was it, and burn it all. No, that's not, it's a lot more than that. And there's also what we call, what Yvette Carnell has coined as lineage therapy, which I think is very important, because when we think about people who blow money really quickly, you also have to think about, well, what's the history in their family and their personal situation that led them to do that rather than investing it or doing something long term. And when we talk about lineage therapy, that's part of the package of what reparations would have to come forward with. And that would enable us to be more, I say, mindful of what we want to do for our community with any type of liquid cash payments that we receive. But just to be clear, that's not the only component in any well-rounded reparations program. Even the UN knows this. I mean, that's already written down in the UN code that reparations has many different elements to it. And that's the whole package that we will be looking for as American descendants of slavery in this country from this government, just to add to that.
I might have to stand up too, or at least scoot closer to one. All right. Another aspect that we would look at besides cash and education. My mother is 92. She said she didn't want to go back to school. So one thing that we can see as a legacy would be passing on land. If initially reparations was 40 acres and a mule, one thing the United States, one thing the United States has plenty of is enough land. Now, had they done the land that they promised back in 1865, then that would, and at that time only men could own land. They claim, and this probably is a gross underestimation, that there were 4 million slaves. Imagine maybe 2 million were men. Then that meant you gave 40 acres to 2 million men. That would have been 80 million acres. That's not so bad. But now, let's say there's 45 million of us, and now women can own land too. But the United States has enough land, we're talking about national forests, that's not owned by the military, that's not owned or reserved for the indigenous, and out of that, they have enough land that each African American, 45 million of us, could have 14 acres. 14. So when they say we can't pay, then we have to start getting imaginative and say, just like when you tell a bill collector, well, I ain't got that kind of money, they look and say, well, you got a house, we can take your car. What does IRS come after when they're coming after you for an audit? So we can say, well, just not your cash, just not school, but you got land. And we'll take that, and that's just the federal. There's state and municipal land as well.
Anyone else want to address that question? Okay, so, all right.
Do you believe that the impact of post-slavery discrimination was worse than slavery itself?
Well, first, let me say thank you to Brother Gerard and ADOS for putting together this program. I think it's a tremendous benefit to our community to sit for some time and really reflect on that moment in history and to help us properly orient ourselves in today's society. So thank you for that. Thank you for the question. Thank you for everyone that came out to participate in this program. It's very encouraging for me to share this discussion with you and be amongst people for whom this type of program resonates. And we don't often have the opportunity to see ourselves in this way as people who are focused and are concerned with the well-being of our people. So it's very encouraging for me to be here and participate in this program with you. This is a very important moment in our history, because I think what it does is it really lays bare all of the intentions that our government had and for free African American people after Reconstruction. So we really have an opportunity in that moment to see clearly what the sentiments were, what the attitude was towards our people, what types of policies came out of that time, and some of the ways in which it associates to what's going on right now. But in modern times, we don't really, we're not able to put our finger on oppression in the same way that we were at that time. It was very apparent, right? But when we see what's going on in American society today, in light of those things that happened then, we can see that it's a continuation. We can see that these things have never really changed. And you when you take, for example, something like stop and frisk, right? We see clearly that this is a type of law that was enacted specifically for the black community, that was used to harass as a pretext for arresting and cycling us into the criminal injustice system, right? And so even at that time, you saw that their immediate reaction to freeing the slaves was to develop black codes, right? And so there would always be, and always has been, a separate system that was applied wherever we were involved with this legal system. So that's one of the main things that we can glean from that moment in history. We see very openly that there was always a different type of application of the law for us. But to your question, Brother Gerard, I would find it difficult to say that the times were worse after slavery, given some of the atrocious things that happened. I mean, they really had a free hand to act out all of their perverse desires, their wicked ambitions, predilections on against our people. Even though I think that question has merit, because in many ways it became more insidious after the fact, because it concealed itself behind the facade of justice, that these things were not happening because of this age-old hatred, but these are things that are happening because it has some type of legal justification. So just on the surface, I would say no. It wasn't as damaging. They were confronted with the need to conceal their activities after slavery supposedly ended, and just by that alone, that introduced a buffer that in between the open abuse of our people and a different consideration. One of the things I wanted to say, and I'll pass it. Thank you very much. But in that documentary, you sister, you kind of laughed at this moment. I was kind of laughing and shaking my head too, I think. But there came a moment in the documentary where one of the white presenters, kind of spoke with regards to freeing the slaves, as if white America had reached some type of moral epiphany, right? and this is indicative of the way that we receive our history. It's always them downplaying the brutality and just how perverse it was. And that's why this space is so important, because we have the opportunity to analyze that history, to interpret it for ourselves, and to extract meaning from it that's relevant to our circumstance. So, that's my answer, brother. Thank you.
At the point in time of the Reconstruction era, do you believe there was an inflection point or a trajectory of black progress? So basically what I'm saying is that at what point had it went this way, it would, it like in essence, it could, black progress could have went another way, either or, depending on that particular point in time in the Reconstruction era. Had something happened differently, it could have been better. or it could have been worse, or however you want to interpret the question.
All right. That point would have been at the point of having the land. So that instead of giving the land back to the people who betrayed their government, imagine
Traitors.
they were really what they had committed was treason. Let's just call it. You can't sit up. If we in this room decided we were going to plot against the United States government and go and really, that's treason. They were acquitted and pardoned and gotten clemency for treason. And you were going to give them the land back, let them let them have their offices back. Wow. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So if that had not happened, but for that to not have happened, that meant Lincoln could not have been assassinated. So this is a nice movie, but it doesn't go into the story about the assassination, which, wow, I won't take up that much time. But let's just say that it wasn't just John Wilkes Booth. There was a conspiracy. And one of the pardons you saw Andrew Johnson sign was the one to Surratt. Anybody in the Surratt family, look it up, Surrat. All of these people were co-conspirators with John Wilkes Booth, but the other part that they're not saying is John Wilkes Booth was a friend of Johnson's. So it was a very interesting time, but Mary Todd Lincoln said that why was my husband's killer talking to the vice president? But they put her in an insane asylum. Said she was hysterical, as you know, a diagnosis for women would be. So there was something deep going on, and the plot was in, and it could have been as soon as Lincoln caught a bullet. And we still remember the day he died as tax day to this day. Ain't no such thing as a coincidence. But that taxes being before, what you might not have known is that before the 16th Amendment, there was no such thing as income taxes. Now there is. But it's a long story, but the inflection point where things look like if it had continued on a particular trajectory, we wouldn't be talking about reparations, how to get them. We'd be still talking about how to keep it, how to maintain it. Boy, we would have a whole different life if that had not happened.
Panelists, anyone else who would like to tackle that question?